Hi, my name is Kevin Thomas, W1DED, and this is Q5 Ham Radio. Today I'm joined by someone who caught the DXpedition bug early and shows no sign of slowing down. Licensed in 2021, Seth McAllister, KD9TAW, has already put thousands of QSOs in the log from places like KP2 and VP2V, bringing 6 meters back to the British Virgin Islands after years of silence. He's chasing DX, building antennas, learning CW, and setting his sights on future expeditions and contesting milestones. This episode of Q5 Worldwide Ham Radio is brought to you by ICOM, innovative radios trusted by hams around the globe. Welcome, Seth. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Kevin. I appreciate it.
So, Seth, I told you before we got started, I happened to watch a video presentation that you did for a club, and it was just so impressive. I love the enthusiasm, particularly from a relatively new ham. But let's start there. How new a ham are you? When did you get licensed, and why did you do this?
Sure. So, yeah, it's an interesting story. I guess it's kind of bobbed and weaved how I got involved into ham radio. I was licensed in 21, but I'd say my interest was kind of back and forth all through my childhood and growing up. And, early on when I was a kid, I did some shortwave stuff and some CB stuff with, and now my good friend I went to school with, KD9TAW, his name's Eric. So I had like an early interest in this. And then, KA9OZP, which was another friend's father, took me down into his ham shack in a basement one time. And I got to see him chase DX and work countries from a wire outside. And like the whole concept was like finding Narnia to me. Like it was just fascinating. And I have, a big IT background. And I remember there was a lot of parallels between when I first experienced the internet and dialed up to it versus kind of, the magic of ham radio. I know many people got started with the ham radio first, but I guess I'm just a little bit younger in that sense that it really felt the same. And, going down into that shack of KA9OZP, that really kind of lit a fire for me. And at the same time, I have a small kind of sustainable farm too. And like, I love having a bit of resiliency in my life. And, just the concept of being able to understand and talk to people across the world, even if we, God forbid, didn't have phones one day, and just have a little bit of, more resiliency there. That was another driving factor that got me into it. And then, when I really went and got licensed in 21, I did a little bit on 2 meter, but then I had a lot of going on in my life and my career, and I just kind of put it aside till 2022. And really in 2022 is where I really started in earnest and caught the DX bug. I love chasing kind of rare DX, working different modes, and got a second Elmer at that point, N9UM, which is, just a phenomenal DX chaser. And he took me under his wing and, taught me all the little secrets and tricks and, put a lot of challenges to us early on in a small group, and was just really instrumental in pushing us further with our interests. And, from there that I caught the bug, and then I said, hey, this DXpedition cool thing is pretty cool, because I'd already been chasing other DXpeditions, and I'm like, well, what would it take to do that? And I think I have enough blind confidence sometimes just to go try it. And luckily it worked out good. It took a lot of planning, but it was fun. So that's kind of my story of how I got into it.
So it's a great story, and I think you explained that well. I still don't quite understand, from a guy who has a tech background, what was attractive about ham radio when you can get on the internet and do some of the same things?
I'm a kind of a bigger systems thinker guy. I love the architecture. I love learning how things work. And I just have always been drawn to not only some of the vintage technology, but the modern stuff. And maybe some of that's nostalgia from my computer past. But, I just love playing with technology, building things, making things work. I think ham radio is just one of many weird esoteric interests I probably have across the board. I think that's kind of what got me going with it. And, like I said, it was for resiliency first, and then I found I just loved it. I loved chasing. I loved working pileups. And I just, fell in love with the hobby and the community, and, had some great clubs locally here, MCWA and 415, that does, a ton of good field day, and it performed very well in field day. I've got a little bit of the flavor of contests and DXpeditions and chasing all wrapped up into one, and just fell in love with it.
So we're going to come back to this later on, because I'm really intrigued how you take that enthusiasm you have for ham radio and the infrastructure and how we translate that to other people. So I'll give you 20 minutes to think about that answer. But in the meantime, DXpeditions, not everybody gets involved with ham radio and then decides they want to pack up their gear in Pelican cases and travel to St. John. Tell me, what was the impetus there? Did you experience some of this online via some of your friends, or did you just decide you're going to go on vacation with your wife and why not take the radio?
I think it's a little bit of needed a vacation with the wife, along with colliding interest of ham radio of doing a DXpedition. And, when Mark and I started looking at locations, my wife and I were already looking at the Virgin Islands area for a vacation at that same time. And he's like, well, you know that at the time it was the 113th most wanted. And he's like, well, BVI would be a nice place to bring your radio. And I done a little POTA. So I really like the idea of portable operations. And, I think it just snowballed from there. Then I'm like, well, that's just a short boat ride away from the U.S. side, from KP2. So I'm like, well, what would it take? Well, we got to get Pelican case. We got to put all this together. So then I just started planning. And, the more I planned, the more it started to make sense. I thought, well, I could bring all this gear and run into some huge problems that I didn't contemplate. But, I did a big POTA first initially and brought all the gear and set it up. And, it all shook down okay. And thankfully at the end of the DXpeditions, we had, 6,200 logs, QSOs in the log in about 40 some hours. So yeah, it definitely worked.
So Parks on the Air, it sounds as if you're doing Parks on the Air in the States, and obviously you're setting up portably. Did that make it a bit easier to think about a DXpedition because you'd already been doing that? You've been already taking gear outside of the shack?
Yeah, I don't want to misrepresent. I had probably done 2 small POTAs with 20 contacts before that, before my bigger kind of shakedown that I did. But I was so interested in DXpeditions that I said, come hell or high water, I'm going to make this happen, and I'm going to plan it out. And it was I like a big challenge and something that seems very difficult. I like working on that. And I thought, how interesting would that be to be able to knock off a vacation? Thankfully, I got a super understanding wife. We got a great villa and she had some good downtime, but I was able to operate and put a lot of time in.
So let's dig into the planning. You obviously have to get licensed. You have to pack your gear. You have to think about customs. Take us through those steps.
My first thing I wanted to operate, and this was the failure of the trip, was I wanted to do SO2R. I wanted to be able to kind of run multi-stream. And I went back and forth on, do I do MSHV? Do I do Fox and Hound? And ultimately I settled on doing MSHV because I didn't have to have a lot of customized client configuration on the caller side. And then I wanted to do voice. And, my thought was I'd run 5 multi-streams and be able to operate voice just like some of the bigger DXpeditions. So that's kind of what I went into. So I started to figure out, well, what would it take and all the downstream, antennas and everything that I would need. And so I started building a list and putting things together. And luckily I had, probably 90% of the stuff in my shack already. And then just started working through that process of what I need to bring. And then, the licensing side, that was actually relatively easy. It was applying for a license over in the telecommunications side of BVI. They wanted a small monetary amount. It had to be notarized, had to be sent in. And, once all those initial hoops, which were very small, I went through, I had the license within 30 days. They did put a PEP output limit on me, so I think it was 300 or 500 watts that I could transmit, but I was running barefoot, so it was not a big deal. It'd be interesting if I could get more now that I have an amplifier in the future. So, that went through the planning, and the TSA and customs I had no problems with. I had everything. I had my license inside my bag. That was, my reciprocal for BVI. It had my federal license for the FCC. I had a write-up of exactly what I was doing, so if someone cracked open my Pelican case, they could say, what is all this gear? Looks scary, and they would see the note and kind of understand that. But I had no problems running through customs. I think the bigger challenge was it was my wife and I. So there was limitations on my packing size because we each only had 2 arms, and ever seen the Virgin Islands, it's pretty hilly. There's a lot of moving things around, riding on boats. So I had to be able to have each of us have backpacks on, have a drag along in each arm for both of us. And that was kind of our limits. So that's a challenge I'm going to have for my next one because I've got more gear for the next one.
Well, I can totally relate, and I'm so appreciative of my wife for hauling Pelican cases through airports. I think she found out just the other day from another ham that she doesn't really have to do that. So I don't know, it may affect my next trip, but it's been a lifesaver to have these Pelican cases and get some help. Tell me specifically what you brought on that trip.
The core radios, I brought an FTDX10 that was going to be my voice radio. And I brought a 991A, which was going to be my kind of primary FT8 multi-stream radio. I had a DX Commander Expedition vertical that I had a 40, 30, 20, 17, and 10 meter element on it. So one extra element than they recommend, but it worked fine. And then I had an end-fed half-wave sloper that I was going to put up as well. I didn't end up operating SO2R. We can, I guess, talk about one of my primary planning mistakes in a little while, but I was only able to run one, so I had to kind of bounce back and forth into FT8 voice. So those are the antennas. I had a micro PC, I had a laptop, so I had a PC on each one, and then all the cabling, power supplies, but I had no redundancy. There's things I would do differently, maybe a redundant power supply. I've got a QRP radio I could bring this time with my amplifier that I would do a little bit differently, but I was definitely exposed on any type of failure. I did not have a lot of backup cables like that. I would do that differently next time, but I got supremely lucky that everything worked without a hitch.
That is the challenge, though, right? If you have too much redundancy, then you have more luggage. So how do you do that? How do you accomplish that? So jump right into the SO2R. What happened?
I didn't get permission from the Airbnb owner. That was the main problem that I would have done totally different next time. I said, well, it's not a big deal. Would this be a vertical antenna? We're in the middle of nowhere. I've never had a problem. I didn't have a problem at KP2. We put it up, and I've just never had a problem with hosts. But I think the interesting dynamic on BVI is, unbeknownst to me, like I had rented the Airbnb from a family member of the main political party of BVI. There was an election going on at that point, and the house very next to my Airbnb was the head of the security services for the political party. So they literally thought for a period of time I was doing espionage and monitoring, and I went back and forth and really explained the situation. But I just felt like, they're letting us do this with this one, and I'm not going to probably string end-fed halfways through all their trees. So I played it safe. I maybe could have done it, but, I said, let's chalk this up as a win and keep the thing moving versus, making them mad a second time. So, that's a mistake on my side. It's something I will do drastically different in the future is, seek permission from your host before putting up antennas.
What other things did you learn that you might do differently next time? You've talked about the permission, maybe some redundancy. What else?
I'd love to run some power. So, I've got an SPE15 now, which is nice and lightweight. I bought that amp, not only for my shack, but to be able to take that with being, sub 30 pounds with a power supply in it in the future, take it on a carry-on. So that's definitely coming along with. And I've upgraded the end-fed half-wave to a buddy hex now. So, my goal for the next one is to be, the buddy hex on, 6 through 20, and then have the vertical, and then hopefully, I'd like to really get back to BVI. The plan now is in the spring, for me to go again and do this again. And I'd love to bring a 160 meter option. I mean, that's hasn't really had much activity out there on 160. It's probably a little early for 6 meter, but I'll have it with the buddy hex. So something I want to try. So you get more experience and you learn what you would do differently next time, and just kind of build it a bit bigger with a bit more power and better antenna options.
So Seth, you've already talked about the limitations of only having 2 people, 2 hands each, but you're talking about a buddy hex and an amp. So you're increasing the luggage.
I am increasing the luggage, and my shoulders are already sore probably from this, but I'm going to make it happen. And maybe there's some things that I could do to get, probably in the future I'd get a van service to get the transport and just do a little bit more logistics on the front end to ensure that it feels more than just kind of a holiday DXpedition, but there's some intentionality around how I'm getting the gear there and be able to just bring more. I don't want to go crazy with it, but I'd like to bring some better antenna options.
So clearly you've already mentioned that you'd get permission, but I'm curious how you ensured that the Airbnbs had a location where you could set up the antenna properly. Was there any online research that you did to ensure that there was actually a spot for the DX Commander?
Yeah, I did. So I did a lot with Google Earth. I was in a bay and I had really nice takeoff angle to the United States. That's kind of what I wanted. I was more focused on, feeding the QSOs to the United States. And, in the area I was in, I was also a primary requirement is I wanted to get something nice for the vacation. So that starts to whittle the locations. And, this was in a great bay facing the United States, and I wanted something right next to the water too to get some of that great saltwater takeoff with the vertical antenna, and just be there to really understand and see the propagation. And it did work. It was magic. Multi-streams roughly cutting my 100 watts into 20 watt slices. I know the math is more complex than that, but yeah, I felt like I could talk to the world there. The bay I was in had massive hills behind me that, it seemed like I went right over those because probably, I didn't have any problem working Europe and Japan and all these other areas as well.
I think we should underscore the point that I read, that you're not just looking for the best place for radio. It was also important to have a great place for your wife and a pool and allow her to have a good vacation also, which I think is a very important point that not everybody follows.
For sure. Yeah. I wanted to make a significant effort at this, which I knew it would take time. So the amenities have to be nice. We cooked out of it. We didn't, and Tortola is pretty barren. It's so much different than the U.S. Virgin Islands side. It's not as great economically. It's not built up, at least the areas where we were. It very much felt like a different country other than the Virgin Islands. So it was pretty secluded, and so we cooked a lot. We cooked on the grill and all that, and just kind of stayed in because we had already done a bigger, vacation and hiking and all that in KP2.
And Seth, I don't think you intersected with a contest during this trip, but do you think you would do that in the future?
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm planning. I'm looking actually at the ARLDX contest in March. Maybe align that with the DXpedition and be able to operate that contest out there. I'm pretty new with contests. I've only done 2 or 3 at this point. I don't really count field day as a contest, but we've done a ton of that. But I really enjoy it, and I think if my ultimate goal is to find myself on some larger DXpedition teams, right? And I know that I have gaps right now, and I think further contesting, kind of building up in that space, just getting muscle memory on larger piles. I've had tons of them, in the contests I've done, and VP2, I had massive piles, but just getting more experience in that, getting my CW op, so I'm a true multi-op. Like, there's just areas I need to continue to kind of buff up on to be able to do that, because that is my ultimate goal, is to be on some bigger teams and do this more than just vacation.
So tell me more about the contest thing. When did you first get the bug to actually try the contest? Or was it the DXpedition that kind of got you involved with rate and putting a lot of people in the log? Which one was it?
It was a little bit, I'd say 50-50 the DXpedition and then field day. I found that, I can run pretty high rates, and just naturally I have the ability to run pretty well. And I've learned that in field day and in the DXpedition, and I did, well, it was the beginning of this year, I did the CQ 160 contest. So that was probably my first one I made a relatively decent attempt at, and I didn't operate the whole time, and kind of ended up first in Illinois and 10th overall in it. And I said, wow, this is interesting, and I could do this a bit more. And so yeah, my latest one I just did, I built a rover for my truck and did the CQ VHF digital contest. So that was a parade of hilarious aspects of me driving 500 miles and trying to work max grid squares, but not actually just focusing on maybe 4 and operating more and driving less. So I learned a ton there too, made a ton of mistakes. But yeah, I'm just having fun, I guess, learning. I'm still starting out, but I'm hungry. So I just got to do more and get more under my belt.
So Seth, I talked to a lot of operators, many who just enjoy operating, many who just enjoy the station building, and they leave the operating to somebody else. I experienced this year with field day. There's a couple of really great guys that showed up to get everything set up, and they didn't touch a mic or a key all weekend long. Which are you? Are you the operator? Are you the station builder? Or are you both?
I don't know. I think I'm probably 80% station builder planner, and I'm probably 20% operator. I'd be perfectly happy designing and building kind of overall stations and getting everything set up, even though I'm no expert in that, right? But I like, I guess, the physical, technical aspect of that. But I love to operate. I just, I like tweaking things too and making them better.
So I said earlier, I love your enthusiasm and it's coming out loud and clear in this conversation. How do we get more people involved with ham radio?
Yeah, we're trying to figure out, at least locally here, how we involve the younger group a little bit more. We're starting to see on Instagram. I'm really surprised on how fast Instagram has grown, just in general, of some of the younger hams out there. And I think the outreach that we can do with Field Day, I think POTA is a great introduction to just the public that might be walking by. But I think it's a challenge. I mean, the community in general is an aging community, and I think I don't know if anyone's got the silver bullet for it, but even things I've noticed like Meshtastic has drawn a lot of people in kind of a low impact way that's at least gotten the interest in radio and kind of RF, and then maybe have gotten a license after that. We've seen a little bit of that locally here, but it's tricky. We gotta just gotta be out there and talk about it, and I think some people that see it too for the first time. People have been far more fascinated when they come to the shack and see it all happen versus just kind of talking about it.
And what about your wife? Is she interested in getting a license?
I think she's happy being on the side. She goes and does GOTA every year for Field Day, and she can now, after all these years, can run rates over 120 an hour from GOTA now. So she's actually a really good operator, but she's like, I'm going to let you have this hobby, and I'll be in the side. So she's our photo captain for Field Day, and she likes being a support more than actually getting involved in ham radio itself.
Well, Seth, I really appreciate you taking time today. You've given me a shot in the arm with your enthusiasm.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, Kevin. It was a great conversation today.
My name is Kevin Thomas, W1DED. I've been talking to Seth, KD9TAW. He's looking for a DXpedition. If you have one and need this kind of enthusiasm and a station builder and an operator, give him a call. 73.